The kitchen was quiet except for the faint rustling of a bag being opened, the soft pop of a jar's lid, the slow clink of a spoon against glass. The dim glow from the under-cabinet lights cast long, golden streaks over the counters, reflecting off the stainless steel appliances and the smooth marble surface where I stood. It was late. Later than I'd usually be in the kitchen, but sleep hadn't come easy tonight. So I had decided to make a snack. I twisted the lid off a jar of honey, drizzling a thin stream over the fresh slices of fruit I had laid out on a small plate. The scent of citrus and something faintly floral filled the air, mixing with the lingering warmth of the oven that had been on earlier that evening. The house was quiet still, until I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Midnight snack? His voice was low, smooth, cutting through the silence like a knife through butter. I exhaled, setting the honey down before turning slightly, meeting his gaze from over my shoulder. He was leaning casually against the doorway, one hand in his pocket, the other resting against the frame, watching me with that familiar smirk that never quite seemed to fade. Couldn't sleep, I admitted, reaching for another piece of fruit. Figured this would help. He hummed, stepping closer. And what exactly are we having? Fruit, I said simply, lifting a slice to my lips before adding with honey. He tilted his head slightly, his smirk deepening. That's it. I arched a brow. What were you expecting? His eyes flickered to the plate, then back to me. Something a little more interesting. I exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking my head as I picked up another piece, the sweet, sticky honey coating my fingers. Not everything has to be interesting. Sometimes simple is better. Maybe. He took another step forward, his movements slow, deliberate. Or maybe you just haven't tasted the right thing yet. I swallowed, my fingers tightening slightly around the fruit. Oh! His smirk widened just slightly. Let me show you. Before I could say anything, he reached past me, his fingers grazing mine as he picked up a different jar from the counter. The briefest touch, light and fleeting, but enough to send a slow ripple of awareness through me. He twisted the lid open, dipping his finger inside before lifting it between us. Taste test. My breath hitched slightly, my lips parting. You're serious? He lifted a brow. Why wouldn't I be? The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the space between us narrowing in a way that made my skin feel just a little too warm. The dim lighting cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the faint smirk still lingering at the corner of his mouth, the challenge hidden just beneath it. I knew what this was. A test. A dare. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to play along. But I also wasn't sure if I wanted to step away. His fingers hovered there, the faint scent of whatever he had dipped into teasing the air between us. The space between us felt thinner now, as if one small movement would shift the entire atmosphere, tilting it past the point of no return. Go on, he murmured, his voice softer now, edged with something I couldn't quite place. You trust me, don't you? The way he said it sent another slow ripple through me, curling low in my stomach. It was just a bite, just a taste. But the weight of the moment made it feel like something more, something heavier, something that neither of us were acknowledging, but both of us felt. I inhaled, studying myself. I don't know if trust is the right word. His smirk twitched. Then what is? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could. Instead, I slowly leaned forward, my lips parting just slightly as I let my gaze flicker from his eyes to his fingers. I could feel the heat of his stare, the weight of it pressing against my skin, making every small movement feel magnified, stretched out, deliberate. The moment lingered, teetering on the edge of something I wasn't ready to name. My breath was steady, but my pulse wasn't. And in that silence, in that charged, heady quiet, I made my choice and took the taste test. The moment stretched, a slow unraveling of something neither of us dared to name. The faint scent of honey and fruit still lingered in the air, mixing with something deeper, something warmer, heavier. The kitchen felt smaller, the air thicker, charged with a tension that neither of us had tried to dispel. I let my lips brush against his fingertip, just barely, the taste of whatever he had offered melting against my tongue. The texture, the sweetness, it didn't even matter. Not really, because it wasn't about that. It never had been. It was about the space between us. The way the air crackled with something unspoken, something neither of us had been willing to acknowledge until now. His breath hitched, so quiet I might have missed it if I hadn't been listening for it. His hand lingered for a moment longer before he slowly pulled it away, his fingers flexing as if he was debating something, holding himself back. "Well?" His voice was lower now, rougher, the smirk that usually danced at the corners of his mouth just barely there. I swallowed, the lingering sweetness still on my tongue. "Not bad." His eyes darkened slightly, his head tilting. "Not bad? That's all I get." I shrugged, my fingers idly tracing the rim of the honey jar. "I might need another taste to be sure." His smirk returned then, slow, deliberate, as if he had been waiting for that exact response. "That's so." Before I could answer, he reached for another piece of fruit, this time holding it between his fingers, close, too close. "Then let's make sure." My pulse kicked up, my breath slowing as I watched him, the unspoken challenge shimmering between us like a thread pulled too tight. He didn't move, didn't push, just waited, giving me the space to decide. To step back, to lean in, to let this moment become something more or let it slip away entirely. And the worst part? I didn't want to step back. I didn't want the moment to slip away. I leaned in, my lips parting as I took the bite, my fingers brushing his wrist this time, the touch light but intentional. The heat from his skin seeped into mine, a quiet burn that settled somewhere deeper, somewhere I hadn't expected. His breath was slow, measured, but I could hear it, could feel it. The space between us didn't just feel small now, it felt non-existent. "Still not bad," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed, my throat dry despite the sweetness still lingering there. "Better." His smirk twitched, something flickering behind his gaze, satisfaction, amusement, something else I couldn't quite name. "Good." The silence wrapped around us, thick, expectant. The kitchen, the late hour, the soft glow of the lights overhead, it all felt different now, tainted by something we couldn't take back. I turned my gaze to the counter, running my fingers along the edge absent-mindedly, trying to steady the thoughts running through my mind. His presence was still too close, too tangible. Every movement, every small shift in his stance felt magnified, like we were balancing on the edge of something neither of us could control. He reached past me again, but this time, slower, his hand brushing against my arm as he grabbed another piece of fruit. The touch was brief, but deliberate. He lingered just long enough for me to feel the warmth of his skin, to let my breath hitch again before he pulled away. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening against the marble countertop. "You should probably go." He didn't move. "Do you want me to?" His voice was quiet now, the teasing edge softened into something else. I hesitated, my pulse thrumming beneath my skin. "That's not the point." His gaze flickered down to my lips for just a second before returning to my eyes, searching. "Then what is?" The weight of the moment pressed between us, thick, impossible to ignore. The air crackled again, the same pull still lingering, refusing to fade. "This," I finally murmured. "Whatever this is." He hummed, thoughtful, before leaning in just slightly, his voice dipping lower. "Funny. I think we both know exactly what this is." A quiet shiver ran down my spine. "And what if I don't?" His smirk returned, softer this time, but still knowing. "Then I guess I'll have to make sure you figure it out." I swallowed, my throat tightening, my breath shallow. The kitchen, the late hour, the warmth of the lights overhead, all of it faded into the background, leaving only this moment. Only him. Only me. And a choice I still wasn't ready to make. He stepped back first, but only just, his fingers flexing once at his side before finally dropping away. "You should finish your snack." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "Right. My snack." He huffed, his smirk lingering as he turned toward the doorway. "Just don't take too long. Wouldn't want you losing sleep over a taste test." The words were teasing, playful. But we both knew. Neither of us would be forgetting this anytime soon.